Welcome to the Forged by Steel podcast. This is Shane McDonald. It's been a while since we had our last episode. Our last episode was right after the NFL draft, and everybody's feeling optimistic, and everybody's feeling like, hey, this is the year. This is when we can make a run. And now that we've had about almost 2 months to kind of simmer on the roster and had OTAs and had mini camp. And now we're in the midst of this kind of dead period, for lack of a better word, where there's 6 weeks until Latrobe and time to fire it up and get everybody ready to go. So I thought I'd just make an episode here because there's been a couple of I don't want to say minor because it is Cam Sutton is pretty major for this team, and of course the storylines that go with that. But they we pretty much know the 90-man roster at this point, outside of maybe some more veteran free agents that are still out there. There are a couple that could be interesting. Don't know if that'll end up happening, especially I thought Cam Sutton was the one that kept sitting out there, and you go, that's the one. And it was. So that domino's already fell. Are they going to make another move at receiver? We don't know. But I'm not going to talk about that. I'm not going to speculate on the things they could do. I'm just going to look at the roster they have right now and kind of think about what could we do for the final 53-man roster and kind of give you a too early preview of what the 53-man roster is going to look like. And, of course, this could change, and we'll update it if it does. But just kind of wanted to go through some of that right now and kind of give you my opinion about what each position looks like. And I think one of the things that I try to do on my evaluation process of this every year is, did they improve from last year? I think a lot of times we get caught up in, are they better than the Ravens? Are they better than the Browns? Are they better than the Bengals? There are some, in a lot of ways they are. And of course there are some ways they're not when you compare them, apples to apples and position to position. But are they better than they were last year? And I think especially when you start looking at position by position, this team, and I know that you might think, hey, you're biased, whatever. And hey, probably am. But I try to think about every position objectively a little bit. And I think you can make some arguments that they're better at every position, or at least the same or better at every position, except for wide receiver. But I would say at wide receiver, the depth is better than it was last year. Now, Pickens and Johnson, that team is probably better than anything they have as a secondary option this year. But there are several capable names there where last year there were not. After the first two, it was a large drop off. And at least this year there are people that can contribute. I don't know that Allen Robinson was that guy last year, but anyway, it definitely a good run blocking wide receiver. I'm not trying to take that away from him, but not a serious threat. So anyway, I'm going to start at the offensive line because I'm an offensive line guy. That's what I enjoy, and that's really where you're going to see some big moves, big changes, and of course it's what the Steelers have invested in so much in these last 2 years. And so right now, and you guys have, if you've heard some of the things that are out there now, there was a lot of speculation on where is Fautanu going to be playing? Is it left tackle, right tackle? It really doesn't matter that much, but everybody wants to talk about it. Last time we talked, I kind of predicted that I thought Fautanu would end up playing right tackle and that Broderick Jones would end up going back to left tackle. And, of course, they have talked about that now. Steelers offensive line coach addressed it in his last press conference, talking about how they do want Fautanu at right tackle. Is he going to start the game one in Atlanta? I don't know that. I think that would be best case scenario for me. I understand that, if you're talking about starting two rookies on the offensive line, no matter how talented they are, there could be some hiccups. I get that. But I would rather just go ahead and get the lumps out of the way, especially the way the schedule is set up. And I don't think there's any other option than Zach Frazier to be playing center in that game one. So there's definitely going to be one starter there that's a rookie. So just going through it real quickly. I believe last year they carried 9 linemen. So we probably predict that they'll do the same this year. And I'm assuming a lot of things based on the way they constructed it last year, and that could change. But so, of course, left tackle, they do have Dan Moore in position here. Um, we understand, like, as a teammate, how great he's been as a teammate, how he's trying to mentor the younger guys. All of that's great. But, will we have some conflict as this goes down later on, like we did with, Kevin Dotson's situation? Because the problem is if Dan Moore doesn't win the tackle job out of camp, which he might, but if he doesn't, then he's not as valuable, which I know that sounds odd because he has started so many games at left tackle for 3 years in the NFL. But he's not as valuable as a backup because he doesn't want to play right tackle, and it's so adamant about it. And I just think that's such a ding on him as far as like his position on the Steelers roster. Like if I mean, I understand that sometimes you feel more comfortable somewhere, but man, it comes to a point where it's like, if you're going to make this football team, you might want to be versatile and be able to do more than one thing, because just as a left tackle, that's not as valuable. And it would be valuable to someone else, another team, if he's starting, but not necessarily as much if, let's say, one of our guys get hurt and he has to come back in. Is he going to come play right tackle? He seems to not want to do it. And so for all the positive things, I don't know about those reports, and they may be way off. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to assume anything, but I do think that it's a possibility he could get traded in camp. Now, if he did, the compensation would be extremely low, and just like with Dotson last year, I didn't know if it was necessarily worth it, but they saw a lot in Spencer Anderson. They kept Spencer Anderson last year. They kept Dylan Cook. And those guys are still on the roster. So they obviously thought there was something there. Of course, Dotson was a free agent after the season and made a significant amount of money. But so, not without going too much into, of course, Dan Moore, Broderick Jones, which is second-year player, started a lot of games last year, really good run blocker. Hopefully he'll make some strides in the passing game. James Daniels is cemented as the right guard. Zach Frazier is one of those centers. We assume that he's going to play. I don't know how. I don't know how you can only say so much about Nate Herbig playing center. He hasn't started for the Steelers at center, and I think Nate Herbig is on the bubble for this roster. Even though that sounds funny because he's actually getting the 1 reps right now, but when you start counting the 9 players, you get into a roster crunch because they did draft Mason McCormick, and it's pretty obvious that Mason McCormick is going to be the one of those backup guards behind Siamalu and Daniels, and maybe slated to, I don't want to say given to him, but maybe just able to play next year after Daniels in the last year of his contract, that McCormick could just slide into that position. But so anyway, going into the depth more, they have Herbig. Of course, Herbig has played center in the NFL. Not a ton of experience there, but he has most of his experiences at guard. Spencer Anderson has played all 5 positions in college, but they have said publicly that they would want him to play more guard now. But that versatility really helps him out as far as making the roster. And then they still do have Dylan Cook. Dylan Cook can play either tackle. He hasn't had to play, but they were very impressed with him last year when he made the team. And so that's the main group. Of course, they have some other guys on the roster that are, hate to say camp body, but they haven't made, I don't think they've made 53-man rosters often. Doesn't look like serious contenders. But anyway, they have 10 players right now, serious contenders for probably 9 spots. So someone is losing out here, and whether that's trading Dan Moore or that's cutting a Dylan Cook or an Anderson or Herbig. Herbig is owed the most money. That's why I assume that he's the one that I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. Of course, he is fine when he plays, and he is a valuable backup. But um, I don't know if he'll make this football team. And who knows? Maybe Spencer Anderson's more valuable as that swing tackle too, and maybe Cook is expendable. But last year they sure seemed to like him. So that's the way the offensive line looks. If you told me who's going to be starting week 1, I mean, I think in the best case scenario it is Fautano at right tackle, Broderick Jones at left, Daniels at right guard, Frazier at center, Ciamalo at left guard. I do think Frazier will start in Atlanta in week 1. Fautanu, I think, is a little bit more difficult because it just kind of depends on what happens uh, with Dan Moore. Then wide receiver. Wide receiver is very complicated. Of course, that's the one everybody wants to talk about. I will say, if it doesn't change, which I'm just going to assume it's not for now because you can get into all the other hypotheticals. I'm not going to do that with Brandon Ayuk right now or any of that. But so George Pickens is obviously the one, and everyone has said in camp that Calvin Austin looks tremendous. I think, especially if you looked at who they brought in this summer with the competition, like Scotty Miller and even Quez Watkins, it looked like they had brought in competition for Austin, and he had to prove it. And at least from what I hear, now how much does that matter in shorts? That he is different, and he looks like a different player. He is playing hard. Everything the guy says is tremendous. I just want to I root for the guy because he just seems like a stand-up dude. And so I think you have Pickens, you have Calvin Austin, Roman Wilson's obviously a lock. Roman in college was mostly used from the slot. They did a lot of motioning to get him open. His biggest concern in the NFL is that he is smaller, and can he beat like press coverage on the outside and those kind of things. Arthur Smith is going to be more versatile than what you saw last year and the previous 3 seasons under Matt Canada, where they just line up receivers on the outside and say, go get them. I think this will be a lot different. You're going to see Pickens probably moved around. I know they've already talked about him playing the slot publicly, or Pickens did. So there's going to be more matchup plays. It's not going to be just, hey, Pickens, you're playing outside. Wilson, you play at the Z, and so on. They're going to move around. They're going to play other positions. They're going to try to use matchups to win, which is a nice change of pace. But so, and of course, Roman Wilson, just to say his struggle under press, watching what he did in Senior Bowl practice against some high quality competition, like Mitchell from Toledo, he did win a lot of reps off the line of scrimmage in press coverage against future NFL talent. So and I think sometimes we have a chance to see more out of Roman Wilson because of how little Michigan did in the passing game at times. Maybe we could see more from him. Really hope so. But so that's top 3 options. And then after that, it gets really interesting. Van Jefferson. Van Jefferson is a guy I liked out of Florida a few years ago. Of course, he was a big piece in the Rams Super Bowl team. Made some big plays down the stretch. Unfortunately, since then, he has been seriously injured the next season. And then last year was just a disaster for him where, the Rams had Puka Nacua show up. They had no need for Van Jefferson anymore, and he was kind of phased out. And then he was traded to the Falcons. The Falcons, I think I have to kind of use it with a grain of salt because the Falcons had nothing. The Falcons had nothing at quarterback last year. Now I know they had Arthur Smith, but they had nothing. They had nothing at quarterback, and so he just didn't get any targets. Van Jefferson wasn't used. I mean, he was on the field. It reminded me, it's you don't want to say it was like Allen Robinson, but it kind of was. Like he didn't get a lot of targets. So I've heard he looks healthy and everything's fine. So can he have a resurgence? Man, that'd be amazing. But I think I like Van Jefferson. I'm rooting for him. Of course, there's Quez Watkins, who really it's a very similar story, except for it wasn't the Rams, but Watkins had a good year back in was it 21, and really we haven't seen as much from him since then. So hopefully, that's somebody that could surprise. Scotty Miller had a good year with Tom Brady a couple years ago. Similar story, disappeared in Atlanta. But so bunch of names, bunch of I don't want to say bodies, but last year they did carry 6 wide receivers, and there were some things that like Allen Robinson, that there weren't a lot of serious threats after Deontay Johnson and George Pickens, and of course, if you're late to the party, Deontay Johnson was traded for Dante Jackson and a swap of some picks in the offseason. And we haven't got the Dante Jackson yet, but I think they helped the corner position tremendously. I do think he's a good player, but unfortunately they did create a pretty big hole at receiver, and it's still there. And even though I like Roman Wilson, I don't think at this point we have that breakout receiver that is going to scare a lot of teams. But I will say the scheme's going to be a lot better. Arthur Wilson is a real offensive coordinator in the NFL. We didn't have a real one for the last 3 years. I think Roman Wilson, Calvin Austin, Van Jefferson, they are NFL receivers, and they will make plays. Now, is this going to be Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown? No. It's not going to be Martavis Bryant and some of those things that you saw a few years ago. Juju in his rookie season, right? You're not going to see that with these guys. But I think it could be solid. And I think it doesn't have to do much to be head and shoulders above what happened last year in the passing game. So, and I've coached football. I've been a high school and middle school coach. So seeing the kind of things that Johnson did last year, I get it. I get why he was shipped out of town. Now, I don't know what was going on behind closed doors, but I know what I saw on the field. And yes, I know that you could say, hey, Pickens has done some similar things. He has. But he's cheap. He's on a rookie deal. He's young. He has a lot of talent. So, and his maturity will determine if he makes it in Pittsburgh more than just these next 2 years. So time will tell on those things. But right now, Johnson, $15 million or whatever he was making, not a ton at the receiver position, but he was expendable. That's what it came down to. And so they moved him. But so getting to the end of the roster here, and if you're going to keep 6 wide receivers, the biggest thing I was thinking about special teams. And I think, especially years ago, I used to not think about special teams when I was building a roster, but the Steelers do. And most teams are. So when you look at, I think that's what's interesting because like Quez Watkins, I don't know that he's been a big factor on special teams in the past. Scotty Miller obviously has, but he's a smaller guy. They really like the Miles Boykin type of player that they had last year. And I wonder if like that gives Des Fitzpatrick kind of a heads up on this. interesting, just something to watch because he is a good gunner, good special teams player. I think that gives him a chance to make this team. But we'll see what happens. I wouldn't be surprised if they add another player at that position. Uh, Tight end position, of course, they kept four guys last year. If you remember that, they had Pat Fryermuth, Darnell Washington, Connor Hayward, and Rodney Williams. They've also added Pruitt, who played in Atlanta. He is older, so we'll see what happens there. You know, could he push Williams off the roster? I would imagine that Fryermuth, Washington, and Hayward are locks. They liked Williams last year as far as like his special teams ability, and he did play, fairly often. Not a lot of targets. No tight end had a lot of targets last season, which that will change tremendously. I know Fryermuth will receive plenty of targets. I really hope Darnell Washington receives some as well. But so that position's pretty cemented. There will be some competition at the end of that. Quarterback, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, Kyle Allen. Allen has had to start some games in the NFL, so decent third quarterback. They do have John Reese Plumlee from UCF, who's interesting just because he's an athlete. And, we'll see what happens. I do think that they signed Kyle Allen for a reason, and that more than likely is the three. But so starter, I don't, it's funny because a lot of people are going to tell you right now that Fields is in this competition, and I think they have to say that. I mean, Fields starter in the NFL the last couple of years, so and I do think that there is a possibility that Fields is still on the roster next season, if they can get a deal done. But regardless, Wilson is the guy. I would go ahead and put that in stone right now. Wilson is the guy. Wilson will have to lose the job himself. He will not lose it because Fields plays well in camp. Wilson is the leader of this. He has come in and done everything you could ask him to do. All the negative things and all the weird stuff that you heard about in Denver, I know that we haven't got to training camp, but you talk about, has he done everything he could possibly do to change the way he's perceived in Pittsburgh? He's done everything. He's done everything he could do. So he says everything the right way. You can tell he's a professional. He is a leader. It's something they've missed. And it's just odd that he was talked about such in a negative light from some of the leaders in Denver, and it's just odd to think about now. But I guess we'll see what happens. But he certainly fits the bill, and he is such an improvement. And I think that's the thing, is that I know that he did some things last year. Some of it is scheme related. You know what I mean? Like they talk about how he threw a lot of balls behind the line of scrimmage. He did. But a lot of it was schemed. That's what's amazing about, their offense last season in Denver, is that they threw a lot of screens, they threw a lot of checkdowns, and it looked like it was planned. It was not like a late check down. It was immediate check down. So the thing is that even in his the downside of Russell Wilson is over 20 touchdowns. And the Steelers haven't had that kind of production at quarterback since Ben Roethlisberger. So it's a huge upgrade. Even if he's a top 20 quarterback in the NFL, it's an upgrade. And this team has competed without a serious quarterback. So the most important position. So I really think they'll go as far as he takes them. I understand that, but I do think he is an upgrade, and he will be the quarterback, in my opinion. Najee Harris, of course, at running back. Jaylen Warren, this is probably the most chalk position there is. Of course, they had Anthony McFarland last year. This year they have Cordero Patterson. I think those are all locks, obviously. Will they carry a fourth running back? I think that's interesting. And we talked about receiver, like will Cordero Patterson kind of factor into he's the special teams wild card and they don't keep that extra receiver. And maybe somebody like Dejon Edwards has a chance to make the team as an undrafted free agent out of Georgia. They also have a few veterans in camp like LaMichael P. Ryan, Jonathan Ward. Maybe have an outside chance of making it, but it would mostly be because they're good special teams players, not because they're tremendous running backs. They do have Jack Coletto in camp. He's a fullback. Of course, I think that's interesting that no one is talking about this, and of course there is Connor Hayward, which that may be what they're going to do. But Arthur Smith says fullback. He's one of the last people to have a fullback consistently, and so something to watch in camp because, how much is Hayward there? What do we see? So let's flip to defense. I guess before I go to defense, let's go to special teams. I don't want to finish with special teams. Of course, Chris Boswell is still on the roster. Christian Kuntz is still on the roster. Just signed a new deal. He's not going anywhere as the long snapper. And Cameron Johnston, that's probably one of the biggest moves this offseason that nobody talks about, is they got a real punter. They don't have Presley Harvin anymore. So that's going to be a huge upgrade, especially when they punted so much the last couple seasons and we didn't have a real punter. Unbelievable. So on to defense. The defensive line is going to be interesting because it is very similar. It's almost the exact same group they had last year. Watts left in free agency, who I did like. They brought in Dean Lowry, who's a free agent. He is very similar, just a kind of a solid run defender, nothing special, but a veteran minimum type. But he could make the team. I think the most interesting name to watch is DeMarvin Leal. Like, what happens there? They really need him to step up. If he did, that would be huge. As you remember last year, he had some games at the end where he wasn't even dressing anymore. So it would really be great for him to take a big step. Ogunjobi, Benton, and Hayward. Of course, that's the big three. Montravius Adams last year had a really good season. I thought at times he had really improved. Loudermilk, decent run defender, but I think he's on the bubble. Logan Lee is the rookie out of Iowa. Really curious to see if he makes the roster. Could he push Loudermilk? Could he push Lowry? I think, and unfortunately, I hope it's not the case, but Leal could get pushed if he's in that bad of the doghouse. But I think his pedigree and hopefully his work ethic keeps him on the roster. I think it's in the Steelers' benefit for him to be on the roster. Outside linebacker, T.J. Watt, of course, Alex Highsmith, Nick Herbig. One of the most interesting things people kept talking about Marcus Golden, like they wanted Marcus Golden back. I think Nick Herbig has become Marcus Golden. Like he is the third outside linebacker now. I don't know what the push was for Marcus Golden again. And of course, Marcus Golden is really old. Like he did a great job last year, but Herbig is the situational the next pass rusher. What they need to do is limit Watt and Highsmith's reps. They don't need to play the entire game. Let Herbig play more. When he played, he made big-time plays. So I think Herbig is the third outside linebacker. The fourth one will be more interesting. That is mostly a special teams player, and that's why it doesn't need to be Golden. So could it be Jeremiah Moon, who they claim from the Ravens? Definitely could be. Right now, I would say that's the leader. They don't have many bodies at that position, which makes you wonder, would they bring in someone else? But they would have to be a special teams player because Herbig did enough to be the third outside linebacker. And I think people are not talking about that as much. Herbig is the guy. And yes, were there questions last year in camp, like is he big enough, all those things? I think he did enough in games, in big time situations, to show that he's the third guy. So I'm cool with him. Inside linebacker, or off-ball linebacker, whatever you want to call it nowadays. Of course, they added Patrick Queen. That is huge. Patrick Queen's one of the best linebackers in football. He will change this defense tremendously. And it's crazy because as good as the linebackers were last year, they were good. With Holcomb and Landon Roberts and I don't know why it's escaping me right now, but the third linebacker they had last season that was injured. Golly, why is he? I'll think about it later. But he left. He I think he ended up tearing his Achilles and um, is still a free agent. But they have. But as good as that group ended up being, Quan Alexander. I know I have to think of it in a second. But as good as that group ended up being before the injuries, okay, obviously late in the season they were ravaged. But before that group was before injuries, as good as that group was before injuries, Patrick Queen is better than those guys. So it's a 24-year-old Patrick Queen. So they added Patrick Queen. They have Landon Roberts still. Cole Holcomb, his demise was greatly exaggerated. It sounds like he's going to be ready for training camp, and that's great news. If you could get a healthy Holcomb in here as a rotational player, I mean, you are golden. Because Peyton Wilson is the big addition, and it's hard not to get excited about Peyton Wilson. I'm a big fan, and I would love to see him play quite a bit. So you've got a wide array of skill set too. I don't want to forget about Mark Robinson. They usually do carry four linebackers. If Cole Holcomb's healthy, I don't know if Mark Robinson will stay on this team, but we'll see what happens. Mark Robinson is a good special teams player, and you know, I wanted him to. There were times where you see him come downhill and thump people, but as bad as it got last year with injuries, Mark Robinson still did not play off-ball linebacker very often. Just makes you understand what they think of him. So I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up getting cut or is like just special teams player at the end of the roster. Corner is, if you looked at the cornerback roster starting last year compared to this year, it's tremendously different. And it is full of, at the starting position, it has established starters. And then after that, in depth, it's some really fun prospects, projects, whatever you want to call it, that could be good. And if one or two of them hit, it could be huge. If none of them hit, obviously that would be a concern, but it's still more upside than like where we were with Levi Wallace or Patrick Peterson, some of those guys last year. So Dante Jackson, obviously the starter in Carolina, he is a little bit. It's weird because he's a smaller guy. That's not really what Pittsburgh's been targeting lately on the outside corners, but he is an outside corner. And but he's fast. Or at least he was before a knee injury in his career. But he is still a solid player. His film shows that. He is not, over the hill. I believe he's 29. He is a solid starter. I know people were kind of critical of that move. Like he's not a, stud corner. He doesn't have to be because Joey Porter is the stud corner. Joey Porter is the guy that's going to follow the number one for the other team. I think everybody that would listen to this, if you're serious about the Steelers, the national media doesn't know how good Joey Porter is. Joey Porter, that might be one of the best draft picks the Steelers have had. If he can continue on this progression, I don't want to overstate anything that they've had in a long time. The Steelers haven't drafted a corner that good in years. So it's really amazing to think about. I think Pittsburgh fans understand how good Joey Porter is, but the outside world might not. Joey Porter, if he stays healthy, is going to be huge for this defense. Huge. They haven't had a corner. I mean, Joe Hayden fell into the laps, which is tremendous. But I don't know. They haven't had a corner of this magnitude. I mean, I love Dyke Taylor. This guy has a chance to be as good as there is in the league. And so really excited about that. I can't state enough how excited I am about Joey Porter. They added Cam Sutton, of course. Cam Sutton has his legal issues. That's why he's even available. He struggled last year with the Lions and was paid too much. I think I don't want to get into his legal issues because that's been talked about enough, and you can look it up. And I'm not here to be the moral police on anything. He's a high quality football player. The other stuff, we'll see what happens. He could possibly get suspended from the league. He did have a misdemeanor. Of course, it's a domestic violence situation. But so, as far as on the field is concerned, if he is available and not suspended, then this is a huge add because he is a quality slot corner that can do other things. He's very smart on the field. So this is a huge upgrade from Shannon Sullivan, like huge. And I realize that people watched him with Detroit and they're like, man, he just gets torched. Detroit asked him to do something that he was not great at. He's a fine outside corner. He's fine. He's a really established slot corner, and that's where he needed to be playing. And just because he succeeded with the Steelers in a short time period on the outside didn't mean he needed to be paid like one. And so, regardless, they've got him in here for a minimum deal. If he's not suspended, this is a huge get. Huge. And I realize that some of the other things that come with it, are negative, but you hope it's hard. I can't judge people, based on these legal situations. The truth is, and I think that's the thing about football in general. Yeah, I don't know these guys. I don't know them. So I think a lot of times people get on a high horse judging other people. I'm not going to do that. So, anyway, he's on the roster and he's a Steeler. And so I'm going to talk about him. So Corey Trice, is next, and this gets in the group of guys that are fun. And of course that's Corey Trice and Darius Rush. And these are two of my favorite guys last year in the draft. And then they ended up with Corey Trice late. Of course, he got injured. It was terrible. But hopefully he can stay healthy. If he does, there could be upside here. And Darius Rush, which, they plucked him off the Chiefs practice squad, drafted by the Colts, I believe. Didn't make the team somehow, but there's upside there. Both of these guys. So they also have some others that have been in the NFL, like Anthony Averett, Josiah Scott's played a little bit. So these are guys that could make the end of the roster. One of the most interesting names is Beanie Bishop, who's an All-American at West Virginia. I'm a big fan of Beanie Bishop. I want Beanie Bishop to make this team. I know it's funny. Everybody's got that guy in camp. He's already my guy. And I just read about him all the time and how well he looks and how prepared he looks and how he's doing very well. And so, hoping for the best. I really would love if they hit on Beanie Bishop. That would be incredible. But so I think Jackson, Porter, Sutton, Trice, Rush, probably locks. And then I think Beanie Bishop, outside of that. Safety position's interesting, not because of the starters. Those are obvious. Minka and Deshaun Elliott. Deshaun Elliott's going to be, I believe, an improvement at strong safety, and hopefully allows the Steelers to put Minka back in his free safety position, which he should have been anyway. He should have been there last year, even regardless of the situation and what they thought they had in camp and all the things they tried to do. Don't know why they did it, but they did. And then Minka was hurt and not a splash player, and I'm ready to turn the page on that. It looks like Terrell Austin is too, or Terrell Austin, and hopefully that is the case. The other guys, Casey, of course, is back. I think people have forgotten about him. Last year there were some things last year that were very bad in his game. But the previous year, I thought when he played, he made some plays and did some good things. So maybe we can get back to that. I think he's a fine depth player. They do have Trenton Thompson, who played some last year. There were people who seemed to be high on him in the Steelers organization. I don't know. He got to play a little and then he was hurt, and so I'm not like very optimistic on that. They do have Ryan Watts, and I think Ryan Watts really has a chance to make the team because there's not a lot of bodies at free safety or at strong safety. And so I do think he has a chance to make the team. He was a sixth-round draft pick. Of course, last year all the draft picks made the team. Trice ended up getting injured in camp, but everybody made it, and so makes you wonder if this group's going to try to have that happen again. And it is there to happen. Like it is. I mean, no one's getting, unless it was Logan Lee or Ryan Watts. None of the other guys are getting cut, and so I think those guys have a really high chance of making the roster, as well as Beanie Bishop, which I don't believe they had any undrafted guys make the team last year. It's a very small class. This is too. But I believe Beanie Bishop could be the first. And then Miles Killebrew, of course, is a special teams demon. I don't want to forget about him in the safety room. He did have to play some safety last year, but in a perfect world, he would not and just be the special teams ace that he is. He's one of the best punt blockers in the NFL. And so that is your preview for the 2024 season. And of course, there are some other guys out there, and of course, I didn't really go over a lot of the guys that'll probably be on the practice squad and that kind of thing. But we'll have fun with that during training camp, and I'm excited when there's content every day and there's more to take in. But these next 6 months a hard time, so I figured I'd throw this out there just to kind of get my thoughts out publicly, and let me know if you have anything you want to talk about, any of this stuff. You want to throw some receivers' names my way and make me talk about it. That's cool. I'm Coach Shane Mack on Twitter, and of course we also have the Forged by Steel podcast anywhere podcasts are consumed, and then also on YouTube. So till next time, we will holler at you soon, man. Hope y'all have a tremendous day. Thank you. Bye.